The public are being warned to brace themselves for more disruption to their daily lives as unions are set to ballot even more workers on strike action. Nearly 10,000 NHS workers are to be balloted by Unite in the coming days, and rail passengers are being told they face their worst Christmas ever due to disruption caused in part by strikes. This comes after the president of the Public and Commercial Services Union, which represents civil servants, said the union's key demand was to get the Tories out and usher in a Labour government, as its members approved strike action. So are the unions playing politics with people's lives? To debate this, I am joined by former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and former advisor to Tony Blair, John McTernan. Thank you both for joining me this afternoon. I'm going to start with you, Kevin. The public have a lot on their plates with the cost of living crisis or the cost of lockdown crisis. So are these unions being selfish by compounding misery on them by striking?
Well, I think you've got to understand the actual quantity of the walkouts that are currently having. I made a small list here. So last Thursday, the not very overworked tube employees, they went out in London, which caused massive disruption. On Monday, the Royal Mail goes out. I mean, why the Royal Mail posties love them to death? Why are they bothering? I have not the vaguest idea, because we don't even need letters delivered. So on November the 26th, there's 10,000 train drivers going out. Thanks very much, but thanks to what happened with COVID, etc., we could get used to having no trains. Then we've got the same week 70,000 university staff. Then we've got 100,000 civil servants, which covers a whole load of areas, which is some other NHS staff through a unison, I think. And then we've got midwives, ambulance workers, the whole lot. This so reminds me. So when you look at my face, you recognise this is somebody who was actually around in 1979 when Jim Callaghan came up with Crisis, What Crisis? And this is kind of a replica. Now, I understand that inflation is an issue. One of the reasons we had inflation is because the workforce, ridiculously, in my view, were given a huge amount of money not to do a stroke of work for 18 months. What do you expect? You get loads of money and there's no productivity. What happens? You have inflation. Then along comes the energy crisis. It is totally beyond me why 150,000 people making 150 grand a year or more are being given £60 a month as a subsidy. So the government are responsible in some ways of giving free money to people. And therefore, then they say to themselves, I tell you what, this not working lot is fantastic, isn't it? I tell you what we'll do is we'll do some more not working, we'll call it striking. And then when they find out that the world has slightly changed over the last, since 1979, we're not all at the beck and call of 5 million state workers against 25, 26 million private workers who don't have the ability to be able to stop me going to work, etc., or stop me going on the tube, or even, by the way, disgracefully stop me from being treated in a hospital by a nurse, because we don't have those facilities. We have where we are today. And Absolutely. By the way, they are not going to win. That moment has come and gone. That boat has sailed.
All right, thank you, Kelvin. John, I can see you shaking your head throughout that. What do you disagree with what Kelvin's just said?
Well, furlough saved hundreds of thousands of lives and saved millions of jobs. Without the furlough support for us to stay at home and work from home where we could, we would have had a recession caused by the pandemic. And so people are in work now. And I think the problem that people are facing is if you don't have a pay increase of 10% this year, you're getting cut. Your wages are being cut. And public sector workers have had their wages cut year after year after year by this Tory government that we've been in power since 2010. And I'm not surprised that they're taking action. And the thing that has changed a lot since the 1970s is not union power, it's labour power, which is there are shortages, massive shortages in the workforce in loads of key areas, right throughout the NHS, through policing, through the rail industry. If there weren't the labour shortages, there wouldn't be so much ability of workers to actually enforce their labour by withdrawing it. And I think that's the problem. The problem is we don't have enough workers to fill all the vacancies. And we know why that is, Brexit.
Well, I mean, we have 5 million people in this country who are available to work, so it's not as if we don't have the people. But Kelvin, can you come back on this? Because John's just told us that furlough saved lives and we would have had a recession if it wasn't for furlough. I thought we were in a recession, and is it not?
By the way, there's an aspect of John's argument I do agree with, which is the labour shortage is actually leading to more militancy, because what they can't normally win, there is a possibility of causing some pain. But the hundreds and millions, in fact, I'm sorry, or, the billions that went in COVID payment. So, for instance, a friend of mine's partner, she did no work. She worked for a hotel in central London. She did no work for 18 months. The hotel was over Knightsbridge Way, and she lived in North Surrey. And at the end of 18 months, she had more money in her bank account by doing nothing, right, than she'd ever had in the whole, right, this woman of 52, the whole of her working life. Now, we must expect a reaction to that. And we are getting the reaction. So what it was, look, this is pretty natural reaction. If you're getting something for nothing, then you think, I tell you what, we must do all this again. We'll go out on strike and we'll penalise the normal working stiff, and we'll enjoy it because actually, funnily enough, we do have leverage. The only thing I would ask anybody, any member of the trade union movement that happens by mistake to have tuned into GBNews, right, would be to say to themselves, remember Wapping and remember the miners. At some stage, the government gets off its knees and fights back. And I think that the nurses who I see NHS Digital today said that their average pay is 40-odd thousand quid a year. So I am literally not going to drop a tear when you get that pensions deal, plus the fact that I just see their latest stats show that on top of their 30-odd days a year off, they take 14 days a year sick. So the nurses know how to pretend to be sick anyway, that's for sure. So I think, come the nurses, I notice, and I do admire, strangely, I admire Labour for saying we're not paying the nurses either. That has been a most surprising and enjoyable reaction, that they have said, yes, they're entitled to something. They're not entitled to 17%.
I do think we have some really hard-working nurses, so I do want to throw that out there, Kelvin. But coming back to you, John, because you mentioned the inflation.
Calvin, they're doing the work that the others that are taking 14 and 20 days on top of 33 days a year off aren't doing. So I feel sorry for them, and I agree with you.
I hear you. John, you mentioned inflation and people having a real-term cut in their pay packet, but everyone's going to have that. Everyone's having a cut in their pay packet right now because of the horrible cost of lockdown crisis that we're in. So is it fair that taxpayers should be funding a 15% pay rise to some sectors when they can't get a pay rise themselves?
So the straightforward thing is, what Kelvin said is right. The Labour Party position is Labour does not bargain from opposition or in government directly with health service unions. That's why there's pay review bodies. The pay review bodies are there to strike the balance, to make the agreement on the basis of what can be done in productivity, what can be afforded within the NHS budget, and what is right and fair for nurses. But also, what do we need for recruitment and retention? One of the biggest problems facing the police force is the police forces can't recruit enough people. People aren't willing to do the job at the pay that there is. The solution to that is straightforward, as it should be in teaching or for teaching assistants or the NHS or in journalism. If you can't recruit at the pay you're offering, you have to raise the pay. That's the way the economy works. People go to different jobs. And with labour shortages, which Kelvin and you both agree are there, with those, people have got more choices to move around.
Okay, so let's move away from the pay for a second, because the comments by the president of the PCS union surely show that these strikes are about more than just better pay and working conditions, aren't they? I'll start with you, Kevin.
No, look, sorry.
We'll come back to you.
The PCS have always been run by the far left, and they've got an agenda. But that's not why the strike is on. The strike was supported by the members because the members want a pay increase. But like, I'll let Calvin cover.
Okay.
Well, yes, I mean, it's not the only far left union. The ones at the Fire Brigade Union, absolute shockers. It'd be great news when the Fire Brigade Union go on strike, so that people wouldn't be dying at Grenfell, for instance. You know, I mean, there's some shocking aspects of trade unionism. And the problem is that, so if I am working for a trade unionist, I actually vote for these loonies who get into power in the left, because actually they think that they are able to beat up managements. But actually, they're not beating up managements when you're in state industries. You're actually beating up the taxpayer. Nobody gives a damn about the taxpayer. So the Labour Party hides behind this particular wall all the time, saying, well, we're doing our best. We can't control these people. Well, the way to control them is to cut off their pay. Why don't they just just not allow union subs to be deducted at source? Why don't we just change that rule right now?
That is a good point, because it used to be taken out of the physical pay packet on the way after receiving your physical wages, didn't it? And now it's just taken electronically, practically without any consent. John, I want to ask you about this civil service strike in order to get rid of the Tory government and input a Labour government. Surely that's crossing the bounds there.
Look, if the PCS members voted for their president, the president's got a political agenda. The strike is an industrial agenda. There's political agendas, industrial agendas. And look, I think the truth is, with half the country saying they want to vote Labour, half the country wants shot at the Tories too. The limping on of the Sunak government is not in anybody's interest, not in the country's interest. It's not in the health service interest, and it for sure isn't in the Tory party's interest. The further they run, the faster they run away from voters, the harder they'll get hit when the election comes.
OK, so are these demands of the strikers completely separate to the agenda of the union bosses? And if so, surely there has to be further transparency between the unions and the ballot members.
Yeah, look, they are separate, because the vote was for the strike, which is about an industrial issue. But because there is such interest in strikes at the moment, because there's a wider militancy, the Labour agenda is at the centre of the news again. You're going to get newspapers, journalists asking PCS officials, PCS elected presidents, what they think about things now. I mean, it's the nature of the news, and so you get the opinion. If you have bully pulpit, you use it, and I'm not surprised the PCS president wants to get shot of the Tory government. That's actually what most of the country are saying at the moment. So it makes them a pretty average British person rather than anybody quite extreme.
Well, chaps, if you ask me, this gives Rishi Sunak a mandate to finish the job that Thatcher started and really cut those unions down to size. But thank you both for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. That was former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and former advisor to Tony Blair, John McTernan.
Thank you very much.